President Yoon.
U.S. military puppet.
U.S. military puppet.
This saying happened during South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol's visit to the Harvard Kennedy School. A group of people stood at the door chanting "Shame on Yoon" and U.S. military puppet. And this visit was part of President Yoon's week-long state visit to the U.S. So what will happen after Yoon's trip? And how could the decisions made by the U.S. and South Korea affect the Korean Peninsula? Welcome to Facts Tell. I'm Sina. President Yoon touted the Washington Declaration as the biggest achievement of his visit to the U.S. And this is something from the document. President Biden and President Yoon have committed to develop an ever stronger mutual defense relationship and affirm in the strongest words possible their commitment to the combined defense posture under the U.S ROK Mutual Defense Treaty. Now, all these were just very official expressions, but according to President Yoon, the Washington Declaration is the upgraded version of the Mutual Defense Treaty. And here's what they're going to do. The U.S. and South Korea have decided to cooperate deeper on nuclear deterrence and set up a nuclear consultative group, NCG, to discuss nuclear and strategic planning. And Washington has even agreed to periodically deploy U.S. nuclear-armed submarines to South Korea. And they're saying everything they're doing is for peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific and managing the threat from the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, DPRK. But hold on a second. I thought people were doing great on the Korean Peninsula. It has been at peace for a long time. Back in 2021, South Korea and the DPRK even agreed in principle to declare a formal end to the Korean War. So where is the danger coming from? Well, since entering office last year, President Yoon's right-wing administration have expanded costly and provocative U.S. ROK military exercises. In August of last year, South Koreans held huge protests against the U.S. military and the largest joint war exercises in years, simulating attacks on the DPRK. And of course, this was conveniently left out by the U.S. mainstream media when thousands of people were chanting, "This land is not a U.S. war base" on the streets of Seoul. And 3 months later, some South Korean villagers protested again, this time against the U.S. missile defense system, THAAD.
The morning routine changed ever since the Yoon Suk-yeol government said it was considering expanding the deployment of the U.S. missile defense system known as THAAD near the village. It's not the first time villages have come together to protest against THAAD. They held similar rallies back in September 2016 when a golf course here was chosen as the site for THAAD. Protests subsided only after the previous government promised that the site would not be expanded.
So, while the U.S. and South Korea are saying they want peace in the region, the two countries start to put on more frequent and wider-scale military drills. And now, the U.S. submarines are going to enter the Korean Peninsula once again. That just doesn't sound like they want peace to me. That's like celebrating losing 10 pounds by eating 10 chocolate bars. According to Hangulin, a South Korean daily newspaper, 6 experts it has consulted reckon that NCG in bringing strategic assets such as nuclear submarines to the Korean Peninsula will just exacerbate tensions in the region. So instead of really contributing to the peaceful progression on the Korean Peninsula, the Washington Declaration and the nuclear deal have raised regional tensions.
Yoon is a warmonger. He is not qualified to speak of freedom and human rights. Yes to peace! No to war! Yes to peace! And the Korean War!
No wonder the protesters are describing President Yoon as a warmonger and chanting no to war, yes to peace. I believe that is their true wish. People in South Korea don't want their country to become a pawn, especially when seeing their president touting an agreement that could cost their peaceful life.
South Korea has exercised full operational control of its military for only 13 months since its liberation in 1945. That is to say, 78 years ago, it's only controlled its own military for about a little over a year. It's still subject to U.S. wartime operational control. That means the U.S. has de facto and de jure control over 600,000 plus Korean troops, highly trained, highly armed, plus 3.1 reservists, and all of South Korea's bases, weapons, and material at the drop of a hat. This constitutes an incredibly powerful force projection platform and major force multiplier for the U.S.
Wow. Only having full control for 30 months in about 80 years. I mean, that just sounds unreal to me.
As we already know, South Korea has always been a subcontractor to U.S. geopolitical design. It was the first to volunteer troops to Vietnam. It deployed 320,000 troops to Vietnam. South Korea's Indo-Pacific strategy is essentially the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy handed back to the United States on a silver platter. And now the U.S. is preparing for war against China, and it's using tension against North Korea as a stalking horse or a pretext for escalation against China and military enmeshment between Japan and Korea and the U.S. And it is deliberately provoking and stoking tension with nonstop military exercises and provocation.
So, I guess the essential question with South Korean is whether they can have, if ever, sovereign control of their own military and stop being an appendage of the U.S. force projection and geopolitical design.
Yoon's visit comes at a time when South Korea is experiencing unprecedented crisis on the political, economic, and national security front as a consequence of the Biden administration's unrelenting pressure on South Korea to join the U.S. anti-China bloc.
That's right. Right now, South Korea's exports are facing serious problems. Having fallen for 7th straight months in April, this is the longest downward trend in 3 years and was very much driven by an extended slump in sales to China and frail global demand. Given that the Chinese market is so important to South Korea's chip industry, the U.S. has asked the South Korean companies not to fill any market gap in China if American memory chip maker Micron Technology stops selling chips to the country. But shouldn't that kind of decision be made by South Korean companies themselves? This is like taking away their economic sovereignty as well. So whether South Korean chip makers like Samsung and SK Hynix can sell to China should be a major topic of discussion at the bilateral talks. Yet apparently, President Biden fell short of the South Korean business community's expectations. Just as the Hungarian editorial said, there are no concrete results on the economic front, which was a top priority of the trip. We don't even know if South Korea made the right demands of the U.S. And as the Korean economy is on the brink of collapse, the president seemed to have adopted an America First agenda for it. As the self-professed #1 salesperson of South Korea, President Yoon emphasized the importance of economic diplomacy, so much so that he took a 122-person economic mission with him. But now that his week-long itinerary has ended, some are questioning whether Yoon deserves a passing grade for his performance. And speaking of his performance, I do have a clip to show you.
A long, long time ago, I can still remember how that music used to make me smile. And now I knew if I had my chains, that I can make those people dance and maybe they'd be happy for a while.
Nicely done. But singing certainly can't solve everything. Otherwise, K-pop stars will be governing the country. Yoon seemed to be passing the ball to working-level negotiations without coming up with any actual solutions. Issues like how to deal with the Inflation Reduction Act and the Chips and Science Act, which have been giving South Korean companies a headache, are still hanging in the air. Some people in South Korea are asking about what a true alliance means. South Korea should sometimes be able to make demands, right? An alliance should benefit the national interest and national security of both partners. Otherwise, South Korea will become nothing but a pawn for the U.S. global strategies. I think what Mr. Yoon should really be singing about is the development and ordinary people's quality of life in South Korea and the peace and reunification of the Korean Peninsula. All right, that's it for today. If you like our show, remember to click like and subscribe. I'm Sina. See you next time.